welcome to this week's episode of The Dose. My name is Blessing Adedoyin. Today I'm joined by the CEO of UCLH, David Probert. David, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Brilliant. Now, you were appointed as CEO of UCLH 2021, right in the middle of a very significantly challenging time. What was that like?
Well, it was a little bit daunting. So I had arrived here at UCLH towards the kind of latter end of the pandemic, and the hospital had been through 2 years of real turmoil, strife, challenge, emotional and physical challenge for all of our staff. So I arrived at a team that felt tired, exhausted, but actually full of energy in many respects, and very much one team because they'd been through a really difficult set of challenges. They'd been at the front line of supporting the population during the pandemic. So whilst it was a difficult time, in many respects it was quite uplifting as well.
Okay. And I know sometimes when you are in challenging situations, you do tend to find opportunities as well. Were there any opportunities that you identified during that time?
Yeah, I think there was. I mean, both before coming here at UCLH and being here at UCLH, the pandemic allowed us to do things which we'd always thought about doing, but had done very slowly or hadn't done at all, particularly with regards to technology. So I remember at my previous hospital at Moorfields, within about 48 hours, we'd moved to an entirely video consult-led service for emergency care, or an option, to have video consult service for emergency care. We'd been planning to do that for years and years, but within 48 hours we managed to do it because we had to. So technology, both at my previous hospital and this hospital, was revolutionized during the course of the pandemic. And to this day, we're still using video technology in a way that we never even imagined we would have been able to. So that's one good example. I think a lot of people, particularly our brilliant frontline clinical staff, realised actually how capable they were of being innovative and delivering innovative care. Some of the shackles were off, so people came up with great ideas on how you improve clinical care, how you improve the effectiveness and efficiency of a hospital. And we're desperate to make sure that as we come out of the pandemic formally, we hold on to all that great innovation. I guess finally, from a human perspective, the staff realised something I guess maybe they'd thought about but forgotten about, which was just how magnificent they are, how much ability they have, how expert they are, and how critically important they are to this country. And certainly during, as we remember the clapping on Thursday nights, they actually at least started to realise that, and a long way we always remember that.
Brilliant. Yeah, that was a special time, I think, for the whole country. It's like everybody came together to recognise that. So I'm curious, UCLH is one of the largest NHS foundations in the UK, 10 hospitals, over 11,000 staff members. What is a typical day like for you as CEO?
Well, the nice thing about managing a hospital of this size is that there is no such thing really as a typical day, which is great. So if you're somebody like me that doesn't particularly like routine and quite likes stuff that is different and varied and diverse, well, this job is definitely for you. So normally I'm in pretty early, checking emails, getting an update on things that occurred yesterday, things that are live in the hospital. We have a very well-established information data download, so throughout the day, every couple of hours, I know what's happening in our beds, in our emergency department, with our infection rates on the wards, with operations that are being cancelled that are going ahead. So you keep your finger on the pulse quite regularly. I like to spend as much time as possible out of my office, within the hospitals that we look after, talking to staff, understanding their challenges, and most importantly, where I can, trying to solve them. And then with an organisation like this, particularly with our relationship with UCL, we're very focused on pushing the agenda in terms of research, innovation, education. So during any working week, any working day, the research agenda, the education agenda is very, very relevant. But at the moment, we're focused on making sure, amongst all those things, that the NHS recovers from where it was and continues to be the great organisation that we wanted to. So that's taking a lot of time and effort, getting our waiting list managed, getting our emergency department back to delivering the waiting times that we needed to deliver. And the team are doing a great job at doing that. So it's an absolute privilege and honour to be part of this organisation.
Brilliant. Now, I've heard you describe what you do as leading and managing change. And I think you might have alluded to this in your previous answer. But how do you keep your ear to the ground with regards to what's happening with staff or patients if you're kind of focused on leading change? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, it's the most important thing. I think you can't work in a hospital environment without constantly leading change, because the nature of good medicine and the nature of good research is that it's constantly adapting. And as a CEO, you have to recognise that this is a fast-moving and buoyant environment to be in. So I get formal stuff fed back to me. We get staff surveys, we have staff briefings, we have live access to me through all of our staff. So I get lots of feedback on that. But as I was mentioning earlier, the thing that really drives me is going out and listening to people, spending time with teams, not on presidential visits. They don't interest me at all. Well, a presidential visit, you have to do it when you start an organisation. You turn up and people kind of collectively en masse are there, and they want to show you all the good things that happen in their service. And people are rightly proud of it, and I enjoy that initially. But actually it's much better to spend time one-on-one or with small groups of teams in their environment, not in this office, focusing on what matters to them, what makes a difference to them, and how we improve their lives. So my job as CEO really is to make their lives easier so they can do the brilliant things they do, and then frankly to get out of their way. So quite simple, but it's not always as simple as it sounds.
So this is a busy hospital, well, group of hospitals. I imagine there's loads of innovations and new ideas, new ways of simplifying processes. How do you decide what innovation to kill or to scale? How do you decide what to stop doing or to do more of?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of innovation here. So, whether it's a national hospital for neurology and neurosciences, which is the leading neurology centre in the world, so is full of people wanting to change the future of that field of medicine. The same is true of a number of clinical specialties in and around our hospital. So you have the greatest minds constantly wanting to drive forward. And then you have brilliant staff that have new ways of doing things, whether it's a system process, whether it's the way a clinic is managed, a corporate function. It is quite exhausting that you're surrounded by such brilliant people, but I wouldn't change it for the world. I'm much happier in an environment full of people constantly wanting to push forward, rather than an organisation that's full of apathy, which does happen on a number of occasions, and that's why UCLH is UCLH. We work hard to make sure we prioritise things carefully. We don't have a bottomless pit of budget. As we know, the NHS is suffering a little bit at the moment from long-term investment. So we have to be very cautious and very careful about those things that we go for. So generally we go for things where we think we can make a real difference, but we also try and focus, particularly with our university, on what we call the moonshot ideas, the ideas that are really bold and brave. And as I always say to staff, and we collectively think as a team, we recognise we're going to fail on stuff, and that's fine. We'd rather fail and try than not try at all. So we try and prioritise with our resources, but we try and always save something aside to go for the big ideas, and sometimes they work, and that's the exciting bit as well.
Brilliant. Just going off what you just said, there isn't a bottomless pit of resources. But if there was, just assuming there was all the resources you could possibly imagine, what innovation would you focus on or prioritise? Because you wouldn't need to prioritise because you can do everything.
Yeah, a bottomless pit of money would be wonderful, wouldn't it? I think, what's our unique selling point? Our unique selling point is our cutting edge life science and our research, as well as the brilliant service and education we deliver. But right at the moment, particularly thinking of where the UK is, the opportunities and the talent we have in this organisation. If we had unlimited resources, I would focus on a significant expansion of our life sciences agenda and research programs, both in terms of physically. So we've talked here about the development of a substantial life sciences park where we can really bring some of the greatest brains together, both in terms of the NHS, our university partner in UCL, industry. We are sat here in Euston surrounded by the Crick, Wellcome, the Turing Institute, UCL, one of the best universities in the world. For me, I would like to expand that as a physical opportunity to build more resource and attract more talent. Organisations are brilliant because of the people. That's the most important thing. But if you can build that kind of honeypot that attracts them, that for me is a really exciting opportunity. So I would focus a lot on that. And then I guess finally, we are through the acute stage of the pandemic, but we need to recognise that many of our staff are still going through quite substantial trauma as a result of the last 2.5 years. So what I would love to do is to throw even more money into supporting them and their well-being. We've done a lot here with the support of our brilliant charity, but you can never do too much. So for me, that would be a big area of focus.
Okay. Just staying on staff, obviously we had the junior doctor strike recently. I was curious to know, what were your initial thoughts when you first found out that this was going to happen? What were your thoughts, and then how did you kind of go through the process of finding a solution to not having junior doctors in any hospital for 3 days?
Well, yes, and we've just been through one, of course, and we have another one now in 2 weeks' time, which is even more substantial than the one that we've just been through. So my initial reaction was one of, in all honesty, quite dramatic concern. Junior doctors, our doctors in training, make up 50 to 60% of our medical workforce. So to lose them, as it was then, for 3 days, and it will be for 4, is substantial. To lose them as we're potentially planning to at a time of Easter, Passover, Ramadan, Eid, there's not going to be a lot of cover around as there was previously. So it was one of shock and worry. But my second reaction, and one I stick to this day, is that people have a legitimate right in this country to take industrial action. And the BMA have followed all the appropriate routes, and therefore it is my job as CEO to support our staff in their legitimate right to take action, and we have done all we can to support them in doing what they're doing. So that's our objective, but it's a joint objective with keeping our hospitals safe, and that is an enormous challenge, particularly where you have less cover because people are away. Everybody in this organisation, whether it's the consultant body, our nursing body, our allied health professionals, or very importantly our admin staff who work behind the scenes, have done a brilliant job in supporting both of those objectives. So during the last strike, our hospital was safe and our doctors were able to strike, and I think felt supported by the hospital. With the forthcoming more prolonged strike, that's going to be even more challenging, but I hope we can come through it fulfilling both of those objectives again.
Okay. Now, staff shortages it's an ongoing conversation and area of concern. Again, I'm curious, very curious these days. So my background is in law, and traditionally the route to becoming a solicitor was you get your law degree, or you do like a conversion course, GDL, then you go to law school, then you do a 2-year training contract. Fast forward 18 years after now, you don't have to have a law degree, you don't have to do a GDL conversion course. The solicitors, the regulatory body have just created this solicitors qualifying exam. You just do 2 exams. You can come from any background. If you pass the exam, you pass. If you don't, you don't. And you still do a training contract. But what that does is, it means becoming a lawyer is so much more accessible to so many people, and it reduces the financial burden by like 90%, because doing a law degree, and then law school, that's 4 years, it's about £40,000 now. A bit cheaper when I did it, about £40,000. Now those 2 exams that you have to do is less than £4,000. So I wondered, this transformation that happened with the legal sector, do you think any sort of transformation is possible within health, or is it always going to be this hard to become a doctor?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think there will always be a period of time that, regardless of what you do, to learn the anatomy of the body, and medicine will always have to exist. So I don't know what that period of time is, but there are a number of medical schools in and around the country that a number of years ago and still run a condensed training program for postgraduate people. So particularly if you've studied chemistry or physics for 3 years, or biology for 3 years, or have a master's degree. I can't remember exactly how much they condense it, but it condenses the program quite a lot. And I know a number of people who have been through that form of training. So there is an opportunity there. The challenge, probably, that's to get a medical degree. The challenge, and one where I think it is harder to condense, is your training after your degree and that time in hospital. And it's particularly relevant, well, it's relevant for all medical specialties, but particularly for what's known as the craft specialties, specialties that are predominantly surgical, because you always need to know that you've done X hundred of a certain procedure to ensure that your skills are safe and competent to do things. The same is true of diagnosing patients. So I think there is a condensed program on the front end. I'm not sure how easy it will ever be to condense the in-house training, just because you need so much experience and exposure.
I suppose it's important. I just wondered how it could be made a bit more, I suppose, not accessible. Loads of people want to be doctors. Yeah.
Well, if you look at so I think it's St George's Medical School that have prepared the condensed training program, which appears to be very successful. And if you look at the current policy of the opposition, they're looking at doubling medical school places should they come to power in the next general election. And that's an interesting concept. And how you would facilitate a population to double medical students would be really interesting. But you're only going to do it by making medicine more accessible, I would argue, to reach that number of people. So I think that's a real challenge that, should the opposition come to power, is one they're going to have to grapple with.
So I recently read a paper that said diversity and inclusion washing is in danger of becoming the next corporate challenge or corporate big problem. A lot of companies claim to be diverse and inclusive, but not necessarily inclusive. If I look at UCLH, the executive board, it could be more inclusive or diverse. There's 40% women, which is great. But in terms of race, we're not there yet. Why do you think that is, and what can be done, or what could you do to improve that or to change that?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to do is to recognise that your observation is a correct one. So I think there are a number of organisations that claim to celebrate diversity and celebrate inclusion, but that isn't represented in the structure of the way the organisation is managed. So whilst you can celebrate things, if you don't represent things, I think there's a real danger that you can be perceived as being quite hypocritical in your approach as an organisation. For me, I've always stuck to the fundamental issues on diversity and inclusion. The first is a moral one, which is we have a duty to ensure that people are not just treated equally, but that we include people in all the decisions that we make. But then there's a business one, which is that the most successful organisations in the world offer the most diverse workforce and the most diverse set of opinions. In the NHS, there's also a third dynamic, which is if we really want to care for the population of London that we serve, it is a diverse population. They need to be looked after by people who look like them and come from a similar set of experience to them. That way you will deliver better care. So for those three reasons, we need to celebrate diversity and be more inclusive. We've made a number of significant steps forward here at UCLH over many years, but we are not where we wish to be. We're an organisation where 70% of our workforce are female. We're an organisation where 49% of our workforce come from black or minority ethnic background or heritage, and that isn't represented at our executive level. Our management structure at very senior level is much more representative now of that and is changing significantly. So to your question of time, I hope that this is just a matter of time, and a number of the things that have been put in place at UCLH and at societal level are all slowly moving forward to the position that we find a much more diverse executive board. Our non-executive board is very diverse, but our executive less so. What I can do is constantly keep talking about it, constantly asking all of my managers to recognise how important this is. Have we got the structures right in terms of recruitment? Have we got the structures right in terms of interview? Have we got the structures right internally around promoting people? So we have a number of programs that look to mentor, to develop, to support, to grow people. And we have a succession program which is hopefully growing some of the talent of tomorrow to make sure that we get the very best and most diverse executive team we can. So I think it's time. But we haven't got a lot of time to get this right. So it's a big focus of mine moving forward. It's critically important.
Okay. And just on that, I know you are an executive in residence at the UCL Global Business School for Health. And essentially the school is, I want to say breeding, but that sounds a bit random. Developing leaders who are going to be experts in business and health. In your opinion, why is this important for the health industry globally to have leaders that are experts in both business and health?
Well, I think it's really important on a number of fronts to have people with that expertise. Firstly, there are very few industries at the moment as complex as healthcare. So you have a growing population that is getting older, that is getting sicker, but is living longer. And you have technology that is changing so dramatically, whether that's drugs, whether it's surgical innovation, whether it's immunotherapy, gene therapy. The whole of the world we live in today is radically changing in medical terms. And then you have government economies across the world that can't keep up and aren't funded to support them. So firstly, it's diverse and challenging, so it requires innovation. And so you need to train people to think innovatively. That would be my first response. The second is that the reason the Global Business School has global in its name is that every health economy is different. So it's critically important that people can come along and experience in their own health economies, whether they're fully public, private, or mixed, how you can manage different ways. And we can always learn from different economies. So I have spent 25 years in the NHS, obviously a public sector service, but within all of my roles I've managed substantial commercial entities within those private services, both here in the UK and overseas. And to do that I've had to learn from others. So for me it's an opportunity to learn. So the complexity, an opportunity to learn of what others are doing. And then finally, any leader in any role requires a core set of skills that will help you cope with uncertainty, help you cope with staff management, and help you understand your skills and your weaknesses. And I think the MBA program, the Global Business School, is all designed to help leaders fulfill their potential by understanding those two things, and that's really critical.
Okay, thank you. Now you mentioned you've been in the NHS for 25 years. In those 25 years, what would you say has been your main, if there is one main, I wouldn't call it learning, but maybe just one thing that has kind of been a thread throughout your whole career?
Yeah, well, I've learned a huge amount in 25 years, and I have to say I learn something new every single day, which is why the job's exciting and why it's good, and why even when you're a little tired and feel a bit run down, there's something that perks you up and makes you focus on the next set of opportunities. I guess the one thing I've consistently learned is that one size doesn't fit all. And so the way that you communicate, there isn't one medium that will suit, here at UCLH, 13,000 members of staff, there isn't one way that will work with them. There isn't one tone of message that is good for everybody. There isn't one group of patients that are all the same, that want to hear things one way or another. So you have to use different channels to communicate to staff, to the public, to politicians, to stakeholders. And maybe early on I thought just my natural style, you could just push out one way. The key thing is that you always remain true to yourself, that you don't change the personality of who you are, and that you're honest and transparent. But I think what I've learned, and technology has helped, is that there's many, many different ways to get the message across, and you need to think of an audience. It's been interesting, you know, I'm in my mid-40s now, I'm 46, and so I start to feel like I'm a lot older than many of the people around me, particularly when you're appointing consultants in their late 30s, which is quite distressing. One of the things I've realised is that the generation of people that work with us in their 20s have a very different mindset around what they want out of work, some of them, how they wish to work, how they wish to engage with work and technology, working hours, working practice. And you can rile against that because you came from a different generation, or actually you can recognise there's some positives to it, and that's the way you need to support that particular workforce. So flexibility is key, I think.
Okay. Now, if there was one thing as CEO that keeps you up at night, what would it be?
Yeah, well, there's lots of things that play on your mind. And most of the time I stay awake when I do stay awake at night, not too often, is thankfully, mostly because this is positive things whirring around my brain about what I'd like us to be doing and we're not doing. So for me, it's the excitement of the place and the fact that people have so many ideas, and I lie there thinking, we could do this, we could do that. So that's, I wouldn't say, you know, that's the negative thing. What doesn't keep me awake here is clinical safety, and I'm very grateful for that. There is an amazing set of clinicians in this organisation, and I go to bed at night knowing that on the whole, they're all doing their very best and our patients are getting the best possible care. I do know colleagues in the private sector and in the NHS who don't have that luxury, who do worry about how safe their hospitals are, and that must be an enormous burden. I don't have that here. I worry about long-term finances. I worry about the sustainability of the care we deliver at the level we deliver it within the system in which we're funded. You know, we cope on a year-to-year basis, but we want to plan for the next 5 years, and that's more challenging in the environment we're in, so that worries me. And then I guess the final thing is, you know, I'm very proud of the team I work with, and I'm very proud of the people that work for me, and I take their well-being very seriously. And I have a lot of people, and they all have their own challenges, and so sometimes, you know, you take that on a bit and you care passionately about people, and that sometimes plays on your mind if people are going through difficult times. But on the whole, I sleep well because this is a brilliant organisation to be part of.
So just on a personal level, David, I'm curious to know how you balance family, children with, you know, being a CEO of UCLH.
Well, it is a difficult balance, and I'm not sure any working mum or dad or husband or wife says that they get it right and right all the time. But I suppose from my perspective, I try and make sure that I remember on a personal level that working hard is for the benefit of my family, so we can provide for them and give them opportunities. My wife and my wife works full-time as well, so the pair of us I think work very well together as a team, and we both recognise that our children are really important to us, and valuable and important time with them is critical. So we do make sure between us we're there all of the evenings of the week, if not both of us, at least one of us. And generally I try and switch off where I can on the weekends and make sure that the time I have with them is their time. And that's really critical for me. Do I always get it right? Probably not. But I'd like to think they think I get it right most of the time.
Okay. And what do you do for fun?
Yeah, not dissimilar to others. You know, I enjoy the social side, and I'm a big sports fan, so I tend to watch a lot of sport if I can. Don't get as much time as I used to. I used to play a lot of sport when I don't do that now, but I do a lot of running and try and keep fit. But it's time with your friends and family is critical, isn't it? And you've got to build that in. Particularly in these busy jobs, you need things to distract you and take your mind off them. So I do spend a lot of time doing, when I can, things like that.
Okay, that's good to hear. So my final question, I like to make it interesting or very random. So you used to be CEO of Moorfield. So my question is, how would you describe a sunset to somebody who is visually impaired?
Wow, what a question. How would you survive this?
Can we have the violins?
I have absolutely no idea how I would do that. I couldn't begin to answer that. One thing I would say is while I was at Moorfields, we went to a restaurant for somebody's leaving do. I'll get the name of it wrong, but it was pitch black. So you go into the restaurant and you literally can't see beyond.
The restaurant is pitch black.
The restaurant is pitch black. It's in, it's not far from Moorfields at all. It's a famous restaurant. Lots of famous people go there, but you can't see anyone for the whole night. You can't see a food or anything. And it was actually a really interesting evening because you left. It was a very strange experience. But it did make you think differently about, of course, the value of sight, but also how your mind works to create things when you can't see things. So I have no idea how I would describe that to someone. It's a really, really good question. And it makes you feel even sadder for people with visual impairment. They'll never get to see that opportunity. But yeah, very tough one. I couldn't answer that, I'm afraid.
Oh, I'll ask a wordsmith and send you whatever they say. Oh no.
Ask that.
David, it's been so lovely
Thank you
speaking
very
to you
much.
today. Thank you so much.
Lovely to speak to you soon.
Thank you.
All the best.